I'll start with you, with Bahrain, if I may, Minister. Actually, I have to be honest, I'm slightly, pardon the local phrase, I'm slightly screwed this morning. Normally, when you do a panel, you have a variety of different titles, so you never have to learn anyone's name. Governor, Minister, Reverend. But now we have two ministers, so you're just going to have to look at me and try and guess which one I'm speaking to at any given moment. Starting with you, Minister.
He's the only Sheikh on that, so you can tell him Sheikh.
Yeah, but... you would make my life more difficult. Like, Shaikh, morning. Let's start with what you said, if we may. You said... You said uncertain times, and then you went on to say great opportunities. Square that circle for us, if you will, when we're talking about investing in that region. Because the difficulty, look, we don't need to know about the opportunities, that much we know. It's the balancing against the uncertainty of risk. That's the problem.
Thank you, Richard, and it's a pleasure to be here on this panel, this esteemed panel. I have shared a panel with His Excellency Minister Khalid Al-Falih once before, and it's an honor. I must be doing something right in life that I get the opportunity to share a panel with him again. I'm always very cautious if I speak before him, because he is the teacher of a whole generation of people who work in economics in the region, and I will repeat that and say that always whenever I'm with him. As for opportunities, while we look at the region, I don't think we actually do ourselves justice in talking about the opportunities that are in the region. And I think the opportunities are actually outsized compared to some of the concerns that people have when they look at the Middle East. The opportunities are only greater than what they see on the news in terms of tensions and issues that are faced in the region. And we have to ensure that we are talking about it more clearly, that we continue on the path of development that we have been on in the Gulf. And yes, there are crises, there are tensions on a global level. But if we look at what is happening in the Gulf region, in the midst of all the global turmoil, the opportunities continue to be outsized for investors and businesses alike.
One could arguably say that the growth forecast has continued in spite of the various difficulties and the headwinds, because there are, Minister, there are always headwinds up to a certain point, aren't there? And you're navigating them always when you talk about investment and investment opportunities.
Richard, allow me just to step back and congratulate Bahrain. Thank Sheikh Khalid, His Excellency, for patronizing our event today, and His Excellency Sheikh Salman for the invitation and for the great things he's doing. Also congratulate Bahrain for what it's done despite the challenges and difficulties. Allow me also 30 seconds to put the title in perspective. Bahrain has always been ahead of its time and punching above its weight. I say this because I am close to the country, I lived across the bay, and I could see Bahrain from my house over many, many decades because I lived in Dhahran. And I would remind people that Gateway Bahrain actually symbolizes how this country, how this area has had the relationship with the Arabian Peninsula. My great-grandfathers came to Bahrain and back for commerce, for pearl hunting, and for many commercial activities. One more thing, the wealth of the region, the oil wealth 100 years ago, was seen by geologists in Bahrain who looked across the water, saw the dome of Dammam, and said, there is a wealth out there, let's go and explore, and Aramco became the reality. Now, talking about regional challenges, indeed there are regional challenges. There are global challenges. The world is full of challenges. Trade, wars in Europe, in the Middle East, even trade issues that we see. However, this is not the first time that there has been tensions, and always GCC countries come out of these tensions stronger. We know how to navigate unfortunate difficulties. We've seen it over many decades of the recent past. And you look at not only the investment numbers as an example that His Excellency Sheikh Salman cited, but you see it across the region. Our credit ratings are going up, our stock markets are strong, unemployment is coming down across the region, inter-regional trade is going up, and more integration is happening within the GCC.
I'm going to come back to that aspect in a second. I want to just talk to Lord Grimstone. Gerry, if I may.
Certainly.
You were the investment minister in the UK. You know the difficulty, and in fact all three of you on this panel actually have the real life task, if you will, of getting the business in. But you also know the difficulties of resilience when it comes to it. And people love to talk about the opportunities and the challenges. The reality is what, in your view?
When I was younger, when I was a young banker, life was easy. Investors invested for growth in asset values. They invested for dividends. Capital came out of the Gulf, came into the Western countries, was happy to buy hotels, estates, see income coming back. Life has become much, much more complicated than that. Because just look at some of the challenges which face investors at the moment. You have to invest bearing in mind the need for climate resilience. We all know what's happening to the climate. Right. You have to invest to bear in mind the need for technology resilience. We've all seen what's happening in the advances in technology. You have to bear in mind the need to invest for geopolitical resilience.
Wasn't it always that way?
No, it's got much, much more complicated. And last but not least, you have to invest for cultural and social resilience. It is a much more difficult job for investors now than it was at any time in my lifetime.
So what do they need to do, the countries involved?
The countries need to be very, very clear as to what their strengths are, what their advantages are. Attracting investment, for my colleagues on the channel, this is a globally competitive sport. They should award Olympic gold medals for these people. You have to know your competitive advantage.
If they had awarded Olympic gold medals, what would the UK under your administration have got?
We would have come 7th or 8th, I fear.
Oh dear.
Because the impetus has moved here. And it's humbling. It's humbling for somebody who has been the investment minister of one of the largest recipients of investment in the past to come here. Because I believe that this is the future for global investment, is here.
Minister, recently, of course, on this question of investment, we can't ignore the shift. I love the phrase that's now being used, the recalibration of the economy or investment economy in Saudi. How do you define it? Because the world is fascinated. The investment, the banking, the world is fascinated by this shift on the tiller that Saudi seems to be doing on investment, from international more to domestic, lowering maybe the expectations, slowing down some of the projects. How would you define it?
Well, I think we're betting on our strengths. As Lord Grimstone said, every country needs to know where its strengths are and where the global economy is going and what are the trends globally and whether they can play in certain areas. And if you think of global investors, whether they're the companies, whether the value chains that are being reshaped, we find that the region is the most competitive globally, without exaggeration, because within global supply chain, regionalization is important, and I think the region as a GCC, but the region with Europe, Africa, South Asia, Central Asia, we offer a compelling opportunity. Energy transition, you can't find more sustainable energy. If you think of what people want in terms of stable policy, stable economies, where else do you have currencies that are as stable as GCC countries, credit ratings as strong and rising? And within digital and all of what is happening, not only with cloud, but AI, and His Excellency Sheikh Salman talked about what is happening here in Bahrain, but the region today has not only the most competitive cost for infrastructure of AI, but we have investors. We have very strong sovereign wealth fund. Talk about Mumtalakat here, PIF, Emirati and Qatari and Kuwaiti, capitalized sovereign wealth funds that can co-invest with global investors. So we are investing globally, but quite frankly, when we look around the world, we can't find a better location to invest than within the region and in our own economies, which are transitioning.
Right, but is there a shift within the kingdom? Is there a shift to, because we're talking about resilience here, to invest more of the sovereign fund, to invest more within the domestic economy?
Absolutely.
A recalibration is the word du jour.
Absolutely. I think over the last few years, we have been preparing the regulations, we have been preparing the projects, building the integrated value chains within the kingdom and within our neighbors and common market here in the GCC. And it is time now, we're finding opportunities around the world, but more often than not, and we're not stopping to invest globally, obviously, but we're finding more often than not that the best investment opportunities are here in the Gulf. And we should not look beyond our own nose and just think globally when we have such ripe, competitive, profitable opportunities here for ourselves and with global investors who are here in Bahrain. We're at the FII last week, and who are also, channeling a lot of their capital and other assets they have to the kingdom and to the region.
Sheikh Salman, the one thing people say again and again, of course, is the way in which Bahrain has positioned itself over the decades. Essentially, sir, this country invented the whole thing. This country invented the whole idea of the inward investment, the free marketing in that sense. Now you're in the position of having to rethink what the role is, where you position the country. Where do you see that?
Richard, I don't think you ever stop thinking about that. That's a constant thing you think about. Every decade, every 5 years, we've had to reinvent that. That's Bahrain used to be a pearling economy in the early 20th century. And then it transformed into an oil economy post-1932 when oil was discovered here. And then it started a diversification process in the 70s, and then started a further diversification process in the early 2000s. And today is 85% non-oil, well diversified. But that's a question of constant reinvention. And today, when we look at the future, there are transformative things happening in the technology space, and we have to be prepared for it. On a point that His Excellency Minister Al-Falih mentioned, I chair Mumtalakat, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and we look at where we deploy capital. And what we have found is that the most compelling investment opportunities, the highest return on equity investments, are increasingly at home or in the region. And that's something where Mumtalakat has, in effect, turned itself into the joint venture partner of choice for inward investment because of the fact that it provides it with the highest return on equity versus other investments in other places.
How do you prevent it turning into, you sir, then Lord Grimstone, how do you prevent it turning into a zero-sum game? I know you want to talk about, the Gulf, the GCC, the region. But the reality, let me say the reality, is an investment that goes to His Excellency doesn't go to you. In the European Union, an investment, Lord Grimstone, that went to France didn't go to Spain or to Germany.
So that's one thing. that people sometimes make a mistake about. Any economic growth, by definition, is growing the pie.
Yes.
It's not necessarily growing the jobs.
It's always growing the jobs. No matter what happens, any investment next to you, near you, is positive to you. It's always about growing the pie. It is never a zero-sum game. We have seen it many times across the region as other economic centers have grown. What happens is they pull all of the cities around them up. And the transformation, the economic transformation that we are seeing in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which represents more than 50% of the GDP in the GCC region, is transformative for all of the countries in the GCC positively. And whether it is in tourism, whether it is in financial services, whether it is in manufacturing, logistics, all of the countries close by, and especially the countries that are tied within the GCC, with an economic union, where there is a constant effort to reduce trade frictions on a daily basis, benefit from economic growth in any of the GCC countries.
I would just say, I agree with His Excellency and say what's good for Bahrain is good for Saudi. Certainly what's good for Saudi is good for the rest of the GCC. And the adage that rising tide lifts all boats is certainly apt for an integrated region like the GCC. We're a common market. None of the economies, including Saudi Arabia, is big enough to compete globally by itself. And therefore, integration within the GCC, and hopefully soon when the rest of the Middle East and the Arab world stabilizes, benefiting from the growth that will take place, will give this region the scale that we need in a world that has the Chinas and the Indias and the Europes and the US, which are in the many trillions of dollars. So we are competitive in many areas, and many of the value chains need each one of us to play to our strengths. And sometimes the strength of Bahrain is complementary rather than competitive with the strengths of Saudi Arabia and the other GCC countries.
Richard, just to add to the point that His Excellency Minister Al-Falih so eloquently made, and put it into context. Today, the GDP of the Gulf countries is approximately $2.3 trillion. Over 50% of that's Saudi Arabia, over 25% of that's in the United Arab Emirates. And that $2.3 trillion is conservatively going to $3 trillion of GDP by 2030, and conservatively going to $6 trillion of GDP by 2050. That in and of itself is the single biggest opportunity for any other GCC country to ensure that they are providing the services, providing the growth engine, providing any sort of services into that growth.
This is why, of course, the UK is so happy that we expect to be signing a free trade agreement with the GCC by the end of this year, or shortly into next year. And you would want it as you would want a pan-regional deal rather than a bilateral. And that's a necessity because, of course, as we've heard, the GCC is a customs union. Right. I personally believe the GCC should make more progress in integration in certain areas. I run a hedge fund, and you have to deal with certain rules in Bahrain, certain rules in Saudi Arabia, certain rules in Abu Dhabi. I think the time will come when some of those differences will be removed, and I think the power of the region will be unleashed then to an even greater extent.
How close do you think you are to being able to realize that ambition without falling into the traps and pitfalls that the EU has fallen into with confusing single markets with other regulatory regimes? How close can you get to a perfect union, do you think?
I think for the time being, we're trying to perfect what we've already agreed to, which is the current economic agreement within the GCC, and there is a lot of potential that has not been realized yet, including getting into FTAs with the major global trading economies. And not only are we doing the FTAs, but we're including within the FTAs investment chapters that gives investors from within these countries or economic blocs security of their access to the GCC markets and vice versa, our investors' security. So we're progressing, and I think you will see more progress going forward.
We've got a few moments. So, Your Lordship, the US election next week, you didn't think you were going to get away without that coming up, did you? The US election next week, let's take a neutral stand, regardless. How concerned are you at the instability that, if I was to talk to people in this room privately, you will all tell me privately that you are concerned about instability come up May after Tuesday. Whether you're prepared to say it publicly is a different matter, but you're all prepared to say it privately. Are you concerned?
Well, any UK minister is an expert in instability. We had, I think, what was it, 4 governments in 12 months, or what have you. And of course, investors hated that. What do? They stand on the sidelines. And of course, the stability of the great countries that we have here is one of their great advantages. But investors will adjust rapidly to whosoever wins the US election. Because at the end of the day, trade, even I think President Trump deep down acknowledges this. Trade is the lifeblood of economies, and investment is the lifeblood of economies. Do you know, we showed in the UK that foreign invested businesses in the UK were 70% more productive than their domestic counterparts. Foreign investors knew how to use capital more efficiently.
Right.
They generated more intellectual property. Foreign investment has to come, no matter who wins the next US election.
Do you have to avoid, sir, Shaikh Salman, do you have to avoid getting caught in the middle? Is the great challenge now for many countries not to have to take sides between the warring trade partners? If, for example, President Trump gets re-elected, there will be trade difficulties with China on a much greater scale. You don't want to get caught in the middle.
Richard, in any time of global tension, no matter what the topic is, it's actually important to deepen one's strategic and historic relations and double down on them. And in the Kingdom of Bahrain, we have a free trade agreement. We've had a free trade agreement with the United States for many years. We've had a relationship with the United States that goes back to the late 19th century, and a strategic military cooperation that really starts from the end of World War II onwards. So it's a very deep relationship, and at the same time we have a large trade relationship with China. But the US has a large trade relationship with China, and so does the rest of the world. So that is something that you don't really need to square that. You know who your partners are, you know who your strategic partners are, and you have to ensure that you deepen those relationships and continue.
But can you have a policy, a successful policy, of friends with all? Do you eventually have to, my words, take sides?
I think you have to deepen your relationships and alliances without a doubt. And you have to have an alliances. If you're an alliance, I think if we were to look at the world as a whole coming out of the Cold War was very much painted blue countries and red countries.
Right.
And one of the issues that happened in the rest of the world after that, one of the things that's creating a lot of the issues today is that too many gray countries emerged.
I was doing the list of risks, resilience of risks. You've got pandemic or health risks, you've got political risks, you've got economic risks, I'm sure we could think of some more. We've got technological risks. I mean, we haven't even really touched on, God forbid, cyber warfare and the way that. Of all of those, Minister, which one terrifies you the most?
Obviously, geopolitical risk is always an unknown and uncontrollable, because you can't control what's outside your own borders, and that's why in the region we're united in our political positions. We always coordinate, vote together. We have a very strong military cooperation agreement, and security measures are very strong. I think the next thing will be economic shocks globally, and the region, I think, has many common parameters, including still that we are not fully decoupled from oil. So the region, I think, has to be working as fast as possible to continue the diversification and decoupling from over-dependence on the oil market. And I think we have gone a great deal in that direction, but we're not done yet.
Do you need to speed it up?
We need to speed it up, and we need to continue to work together to manage supply and demand in the oil markets, and to make sure we cushion those shocks and minimize their impact.
One of the things we talked at the beginning, and as we come to the end, that's fascinating is Bahrain's ability to be ahead of the game. And you elegantly talked about it, the different things that this country has done. You're doing it again, aren't you? Because you're further ahead on the diversification. What was the number you said? The non-oil economy?
It's over 85% non-oil in Bahrain now.
So other countries...
53% in Saudi.
And Saudi Arabia rapidly went to 53%. In a short period.
We're above 53% now.
And our government revenues are about 40% now, non-oil. It used to be 90% oil just before Vision 2030. So this is just in 6-7 years we're providing that stability, and the government being able to continue to spend without being dependent so much on oil revenues.
And in Bahrain, one of the things has been that, first of all, the diversification process has been going on for a long time, really, from the 70s, and then really spurred on over the last 20 years. But the rapidity at which we're seeing the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia move, and the scale. Let's not forget that to do something at scale is a lot more complex, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's economy is more than 20 times the size of Bahrain's. It's actually easier to execute at a smaller scale than it is at a bigger scale. But Richard, you asked a question about one of the biggest risks. And one of the biggest risks, and of course geopolitical risks, we'll always be talking about, and is always a factor that is an unknown that one has to be prepared for to the best of their ability. One of the risks, though, that's upcoming is the productivity risk. And that's an issue that we need to really focus on. Because at the end of the day, everything is a people's business. Even when we talk about manufacturing is a people business. The oil industry is a people business. The banking sector is certainly a people business. And FDI is a people business as well. And attracting FDI is a people business. And this is where we come to one of the most important competitive advantages in our part of the world. Because from a people business perspective, the policies that are being put in place,
right,
the long-term strategic thinking, the strong leadership is an important part of it. And then couple that with another part of the people business, which is that we have one of the most skilled workforces in the world, one of the most digitally literate, youngest populations in the world, and the pools of capital that can be deployed to unlock further opportunity to ensure that that skilled workforce are given the opportunities. And as rapid technology is really taking on the world and being developed, what we need to ensure is that technological rollout is inclusive, and as many people are taken on the journey as possible.
And it's these huge changes that are creating the investment opportunities.
But it's managing those changes that creates the investment opportunities.
Yes, and it's turning what I always like to think of investment aspirations into investment projects. I hate investment aspirations. You can't invest in an aspiration. An investor has to have something physical. It needs an opportunity. It needs infrastructure. It needs skills. It needs businesses.
And in the
That's
end,
where investment comes from.
And in the end, it needs a paper with a signature at the bottom, but because aspirations don't do it. You need to close something, yes.
I would just say on the risk theme, there is one risk, but it's also probably the mitigant of most risks, which is technology. Technology disruptions could be a risk if you ignore it and if you don't invest in it and if you don't get ahead of where technology is going. But if you invest properly in technology, which means you innovate, you do the research, and you invest in people, as His Excellency Sheikh Salman, who are the inventors and innovators, you're able to mitigate security risk, you're able to mitigate financial risk, you're able to mitigate productivity risk that has been talking about, and you attract investments, because today investments are looking for that holistic ecosystem which exists here in the GCC, I'm proud to say, including the technology investments that we're seeing in projects like NEOM, including the AI push across the GCC and other and biotech and healthcare and all of the tech issues.
And we are out of time. I have to say, sir, you do get the prize for the most fashionable person on this stage, because whilst we've been talking, I have noticed your shoelaces. And your shoelaces have got high-vis yellow at the bottom of them, which I congratulate you on, sir.
Match my
absolutely, it is not lost on me, sir. You are our fashionista today. Thank you, our panel. Thank you.
Well, I like your pink tie.